going to be in Hosea chapter 9 this morning, if you want to turn there. And while you're turning there, I posted last night on the FTC thing. My family's going to be out of town the week of the 19th. We have a gentleman coming. His name is Kyle Shreve. He and his wife and their little baby, about a year old, something like that. They will be with us all day on that day, doing Sunday school, the morning service, and the evening service. We need someone that can keep them overnight, Saturday night, and then they will leave after they're done ministering on Sunday afternoon. But we're not going to be here. If someone's available to do that, if you would let me know. I'll make sure. That Kyle knows, headed to Chile. They were hoping to go a little while ago, and I actually had him scheduled to come probably 18 months or so ago to come speak at the church. And then they had a situation come up that they have resolved and worked through, and now I know he is really excited about finishing deputation and getting to the mission field. So keep that in mind. The board's going to meet this afternoon. We need to pick committees and get started in preparation for our annual business meeting, the first Sunday night in February. And so committees will start doing their thing, and then we'll announce to you. And if anyone has any recommendations, folks, we'll follow the procedure that we always do. Hosea chapter 9. I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm not sure what's going on, but got choked up a couple of times in Sunday school. So if I have to pause for a minute, please forgive me. Hosea chapter 9, starting in verse 1. Rejoice not, O Israel, for joy as other people, for thou hast gone a whoring from thy God. Thou hast loved a reward upon every corn floor. The floor of the winepress shall not feed them, and the new wine shall fail in her. They shall not dwell in the Lord's land, but Ephraim shall return to Egypt, and they shall eat unclean things in Assyria. They shall not offer wine offerings to the Lord, neither shall they be pleasing unto him. Their sacrifices shall be unto them as the bread of mourners. All that eat thereof shall be polluted. For their bread, for their soul shall not come into the house of the Lord. What will ye do in the solemn day, and in the day of the feast of the Lord? For lo, they are gone because of destruction. Egypt shall gather them up. Memphis shall bury them. The pleasant places for their silver, nettles shall possess them. Thorns shall be in their tabernacles. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, throughout this book and throughout these passages, we have seen over and over and over again your justice, your judgment, your mercy, your love, your goodness, your patience. And over and over again, you warned the nation of Israel what was about to happen, and they ignored those warnings, and so they started reaping the unfortunate consequences of the choices that they've made. We know that our flesh is weak. Sometimes it is so easy to be distracted by the things of this world. But Father, help us to be focused. Like Paul said when he told the Philippians, to be able to run the race, laying aside the weight that so easily besets us, not turning to the right hand or to the left hand, not looking back, but looking forward towards you, towards the goal that you are trying to accomplish in our life. In 2020, I pray that you would conform us more and more to the image of your dear Son, Jesus Christ. For it's in his name we pray. Amen. Did you celebrate New Year's? All of the blessings of the last year, all of the great hopes and dreams of the coming year, and you look forward to being with family and friends, and then all of a sudden a prophet shows up and crashes the party and ruins the fun. You say, wait a minute, that didn't happen at my New Year's party. Well, it does here. Might not have been New Year's for them, but it's the same type of a situation. It's probably the harvest party. And there's bounty that's going on. They're all excited, and they're getting ready to celebrate the harvest. And all of a sudden, Hosea shows up, and in verse 1, he has a really strong message for them. What are you talking about, a party pooper? Rejoice not, O Israel, for joy as other people. Well, what do you mean, Hosea? Can you not hear the people shouting him down saying, what do you mean don't rejoice? I mean, look at all the blessings that we have. We have a fantastic harvest. Things are going good. Life is good. Assyria is leaving us alone. Egypt's leaving us alone. What could possibly go wrong? Well, the first 6 verses are about prophecy that Hosea tells them that is a very, very strong warning of why they should not celebrate. In verse 1, he starts off and says, well, the reason you ought not to is because you have nothing to celebrate. Now, it sure seems like they have something to celebrate. But if you're going to look at it from God's perspective, and if you're going to look at it from the way Hosea is presenting it to them, he says, listen, a fresh perspective wouldn't hurt anything because you think you have a lot of reason to celebrate, and God says, no. This is Sukkot. It involved feasting. There was a lot of mirth. There was a lot of dancing. There was a big celebration that always went on. After all, you brought in the harvest and God has blessed. What is the problem here? Turn, if you will, to Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 3. And I'll read it for you. Thou hast multiplied the nation and not increased the joy. They joy before thee according to the joy in harvest, and as men rejoice when they divided the spoil. In other words, what he's doing is he's saying, this is comparable to when you're in battle, and the battle is over, there's no more death and dying, and now everybody's just digging out the plunder, and everybody's dividing it up. That's the happy time. The happy time isn't in the middle of the fight, and he's saying, you know, when the work is being done at the harvest and you're not sure how good a harvest it's going to be, there may be some questions in your mind. It might be a little bit of an unsettling time. But when the harvest is done and you start going back and you look at all the bushels and you look at all that's been brought in, that's not a time to be questioning what's going to be happening. That's a time for rejoicing. Sukkot was a thing that the Jewish people did, but all nations celebrated a great harvest because they looked upon it as blessings from God or blessings from their God. And a lot of people associate that if I am prosperous now, then that means that I'm going to have a good future. This morning in Sunday school, we were looking at the dream that Pharaoh has with the 7 fat cows and the 7 thin cows, and the thin cows are going to eat up the fat cows. And Joseph gets promoted so that he can prepare for it. Can you imagine what would have happened if Joseph doesn't prepare for it? If they had just lived it up for 7 years and wasted the abundant harvest that had been given to them, and then all of a sudden the famine starts, you might make it through year 1 or 2, or maybe even 3. But what do you do in years 4, 5, 6, and 7? And so they're looking at this situation, they're saying, listen, our harvest is so bountiful, even if we have a tough time next year, we have plenty enough to get us through the next year. Why would we not celebrate? But he gives them an object lesson. Again, he's done this over and over and over again in the book of Hosea. Look what he says here in verse 1. Sorry, I'm still in Isaiah. No wonder it looks funny. Rejoice not, O Israel, for joy as other people, for thou hast gone a-whoring from thy God, thou hast loved a reward upon every corn floor. Now, this is kind of like a two-sided object lesson. The first part, prostitutes often frequented the threshing floors. Oftentimes, when the harvest would start, the men would sleep there at the threshing floor, and they would stay there so that they could get up in the morning and start the harvest again. And it wasn't uncommon for them to stay the whole time until the harvest was done. If perchance some of them went home, you didn't want to leave all the grain sitting there on the threshing floor unprotected. So they would, at the bare minimum, if they weren't going to all stay and get up early the next morning and get back to work, they would leave guards that would stay all night long to make sure that nobody came in and stole the grain. Well, prostitutes would take advantage of it, and they often worked the threshing floors. This is a picture of unfaithfulness physically. There's actually a lot of this that happens throughout the Bible. I was kind of shocked. One of them, a young man dies, and he leaves behind a daughter-in-law. And dad says to the daughter-in-law, well, if you'll wait, I have another younger son, and the younger son will come and be your husband. And so she waits and waits and waits, and the younger son gets of age, but he's not given to her in marriage. And so when it comes time to thresh, they go to the threshing floor of Onan, and he goes up there, and he sees a prostitute by the way, and he sleeps with her. She becomes pregnant. A little while later, it's told her, hey, your daughter-in-law's pregnant. He's mad. He's ready to kill her. But when he shows up to enact judgment upon her, wait a minute, his daughter-in-law is standing there holding the things that he gave her at the threshing floor. He says, she has been more righteous than I have. Well, both of you have a problem in my book. Why is it that while you are away from your wife, you are unfaithful every time a situation can occur? And that's exactly what God is saying to the nation of Israel. Why is it that every time I turn around, you're sneaking off and being unfaithful with me? But there's more to it. Because probably one of the biggest ways that they are unfaithful is in the worship of the Baals. Now, Baal worship is the god of fertility. And so they attribute the great harvest to the blessing of Baal and not to God. You have loved a reward upon every corn floor. You see the bounty that I have given you, and instead of giving the praise and the worship where it's due to me as God, no. Instead, you are attributing it to Baal. Now, if you are prosperous now means that you're going to have a good future, then in order to obtain fertility, you have to be fertile. And so lewd sin was included in the worship of Baal in the hopes that if they were very fertile, then Baal would bless them with fertility. And what they're doing is they're saying, by virtue of the fact that we have this great harvest, Baal has rewarded us. If we want to be rewarded next year, then we have to run around with all these prostitutes. It's amazing that lewd sin can enter so often in the name of religion. Fulfilling the lust of the flesh. God says, why have you done this? You have nothing to celebrate. You are attributing it to Baal, and he's not going to be able to help you in just a few months. Verses 2 and 3, you have no future here. You say, how can it get worse? Well, they are celebrating this bountiful harvest, and everybody's all excited. Look what he says in verse 2. The floor and the winepress shall not feed them, and the new wine shall fail in her. The provision is gone. The provision is gone. How can the provision be gone when we have this bountiful harvest? Everybody's just got done threshing wheat. Everybody's in a mood to celebrate. Let's throw a party. But their blessing is actually a curse. See, they have joy for a physical blessing has blinded them to the need to mourn for their sin. It's amazing to me. We're going to turn there. In Luke chapter 12, Jesus is addressing this same type of a situation with the religious folks of his day. And he shocks them. Because this rich man walks up to him and he's asking him about some things. He's going to give him a parable about a rich man. He has had such abundance, he doesn't know what to do with it. And in most times, we look at affluence, we look at abundance, and we say that has to be the blessing of God. But sometimes, abundance can be a curse. Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 13. One of the company said unto him, Master, speak to my brother that he divide the inheritance with me. And he said unto him, Man, who made me a judge or a divider over you? And he said unto them, Take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. He spake a parable unto them, saying, The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentiful. And notice, he says he's already rich, and it brings forth abundantly. And he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, because I have no room where to bestow my fruits? We look at that and we say, Man, that's a really good problem to have. I mean, when you have a harvest that's so big that you don't even have barns big enough to hold it all, that's a good problem to have. This will I do, I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, now hold on a minute, because here's the problem. Physical prosperity does not equal spiritual prosperity. And he looks at all these barns he's built, and he looks at this fantastic harvest, and he looks around at how much he has accomplished, and becomes really selfish, and he talks to his soul as if he can do anything about his soul. I will say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God had said unto him, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then who shall those things be which thou hast provided? So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. How many times you read about some billionaire, he dies, and he gives his fortune to his kids, and they run around and they squander and they waste it. And you look at their character, and they have no character. I don't follow a lot of social media, and I quit watching the news because I get sick and tired of listening to whatever the Kardashians are doing and whoever else. Spoiled little rich kids running around trying to stay in the news and be famous for what? Their provision is gone. Go with me to James chapter 4. James chapter 4, verse 6. But he giveth more grace, wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. Submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. Be afflicted, and mourn, and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning, and your joy to heaviness. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he shall lift you up. See, the nation of Israel is celebrating this bountiful harvest, which they are in idolatry attributing to Baal. And Hosea comes in to crash the party, and he says, listen, you have nothing to celebrate, and in fact, you don't even have a future here because of decisions like this. You are celebrating physical prosperity, and you are bankrupt spiritually. Turn your laughter to heaviness and focus a moment upon your spiritual condition before it is too late. In Hosea chapter 2, verses 9 and 12, we have an instance about being blasted by the hand of God or being plundered by the hand of man. And sometimes he uses both of those things as judgment to try and wake us up and make us pay attention to what is really important in life. Instead of looking at how big the barns are, we need to start looking at our heart. We need to start looking at our soul. Man looks on the outward appearance. God looks on the heart. If you go back to Hosea chapter 9, interesting, you could read right over this and not pick up what he is saying. But when he is talking to them, he says, the floor and the winepress shall not, here it is, feed them. They're getting ready to have a big party, right? They're getting ready to celebrate. They have bounty. And he says, you don't have a future here because in the future, you're not even going to have enough to feed you, let alone feast upon. You wouldn't think of throwing a party in years of famine, would you? You can't afford to waste it. You can't invite people over to your house and have a big party if you're worried about your family starving to death in the coming days, weeks, or months. Hosea looks at me and says, you're getting ready to throw this big party as if life is just going to keep on going on and going on and going on. And I'm here to tell you, you have been enjoying the blessings that God has provided, but you won't worship him. You won't give him the glory for it. So don't be shocked when he withholds his hand of blessing and you start reaping the consequences. You don't have a future here. The provision's going to be gone. The basics of life are talked about. The grain, the oil, and the wine. That's what he talks about, the fleshing, threshing floor is the grain. The winepress, they use the word wine press. I would have just used the word press, because the word that's used here could be used either of grapes or olive oil. And I believe it's talking about olive oil, or he wouldn't have said, and the new wine shall fail in her. Why talk about the wine separately if you were going to just talk about the threshing floor, all of the grains, and the presses, which affect everything that you get wine or oil or whatever from? So basically what he said here is you've got the olive oil, and you've got the wine, and you've got the grain. Everything you need to bake, everything you need to cook, everything you need to light your house, everything you need to function on a normal daily basis, you are going to struggle with. It will not meet your daily needs. He goes on in verse 3 and says the protection is gone. It's not bad enough that it's going to be hard times in the nation of Israel. But he says they shall not dwell in the Lord's land. What? I mean, if you have picked up on anything in Sunday school, there are 3 blessings that go through the Abrahamic covenant and keep on going. I'm going to make of thee a great nation. I'm going to give you land. And in you, all the world's going to be blessed. And that's going to happen through Jesus Christ. And over and over and over again, in all the tough times in the nation of Israel, God keeps coming back to whichever one of the patriarchs it is, and he keeps reiterating those 3 promises. And now he tells them, you're not dwelling in the Lord's land. Listen, what's the nation of Israel without the promised land? Who are they without the promised land? You can't take the promised land away. I mean, how many laws are about it all reverting back to them after the year of Jubilee, because they are so intricately tied? And if you sell it, you can only sell it in certain ways, and the kinsman redeemer has to have the opportunity to buy it first. And all these things about making sure that the land stays divided up among the people the way God intended it to be. Now you're going to say, you don't get to dwell in the Lord's land? What a harsh thing, but he's not done yet. Ephraim shall return to Egypt, and they shall eat unclean things in Assyria. Now, returning to Egypt is not literal, it's a picture. Over and over and over again, we've seen Hosea say, you're going to go back to Egypt, you're going to go back to Egypt. But we know the Assyrians are coming. He even tells us that. So why does he keep saying, you're going to go back to Egypt, if they're not going to Egypt, they're going to Assyria? Is this one of those times when the Bible contradicts itself? No, it is not. What he is talking about is a reversal of their salvation from slavery. If I ask you, when does the nation of Israel start? A lot of you would raise your hand and say, Abraham. Is Abraham a nation? So when does the nation of Israel really start as a nation? Not as a promise of a nation, but as a real nation. You can read about it in Exodus. Because when we're going to get there eventually in Sunday school, Joseph is going to be the means for providing for the family during the 7 lean years. And eventually he moves the family down to Egypt. Things are great. I mean, after all, Joseph's second in command of the whole country, and they start growing and they start prospering, but pretty soon there comes a Pharaoh that doesn't know them, and instead of prospering and growing, they actually become slaves. Their biggest holiday of the year is what? Passover. Passover. It changes their calendar and it starts their year. The time when the death angel passed over them, punished them, and they actually left early that morning with the spoils of Egypt and became a nation. They came out from, they were separated from. And now God says, listen, every time you're going to celebrate Passover from now on, you're not going to have anything to celebrate because you're going to be back in slavery. It's not going to be to Egypt, it's going to be to Assyria, but it's going to be the same type of thing. It's a reversal of the blessing of God. He brought them out of the land of Egypt. He's getting ready to deliver them to the Assyrians. The southern tribe gets ready to be delivered to the Babylonians. Passover is the start of their self-identity as a nation. And now they're getting ready to have no identity as a nation. getting ready to have no land to live in or be tied to. In other words, you have nothing to celebrate. He goes one step farther, and it's kind of like rubbing salt in the wound. He says you're going to eat unclean things in Assyria. If you ate something unclean, it would defile you. So you could not go and participate in temple worship. You could not make a sacrifice. You couldn't go into the temple if you were defiled until you had gone through the ritualistic cleansing. It's interesting because God says, well, you're defiled anyway, so what difference does it make? What? Can you imagine the priests that are hearing this? Can you imagine the folks that are in the temple office? Can you imagine the ones that are still trying to go and worship and don't want to be there? And you've got priests of Baal, you've got priests of Ashtaroth, you've got all these folks, and boy, they think they're holy and righteous. And Hosea just slaps them right across the face and he says, you know what? In God's eyes, you're about as unclean as it gets. Verses 4 and 5. Not only is their provision about to run out, not only are they about to lose the land, but they're not going to have any chance to celebrate or worship. Look at verse 4. They shall not offer wine offerings to the Lord, neither shall they be pleasing unto him. Their sacrifices shall be unto them as the bread of mourners. All that eat thereof shall be polluted for their bread, for their souls shall not come into the house of the Lord. What will you do in the solemn day and in the day of the feast of the Lord? This is interesting. He talks about their worship, and then he's going to talk about their feast days. Remember back in Hosea chapter 3, verse 4, when he told them that this was going to happen? There's not going to be a bounty of blessing with which to offer a sacrifice. They are not going to be able to cleanse themselves because there isn't going to be a temple and there aren't going to be priests functioning. There's no altar for sacrifice. And if there's no altar for sacrifice, then you can't lay your hand on the lamb and use him as a situation for forgiveness of sin and slay it and burn it. So if there's no forgiveness of sin, there's no way to cleanse yourself. What do you do? There's no altar of incense for prayer. So communication with God has been shut off. He's already said that he's going to turn his back on them. There's not going to be any reading of the law at the temple. There's no government by that law because it's going to be governed by the Assyrians. And he uses a term that's really interesting here for them to understand. He says, the bread of mourners. What in the world is the bread of mourners? Turn to Numbers chapter 19. Very important concept that he shares with them here in Numbers chapter 19. Verses 14 and 15. This is the law when a man dieth in a tent. All that come into the tent and all that is in the tent shall be unclean 7 days. And every open vessel which hath no covering bound upon it is unclean. And whosoever toucheth one that is slain with a sword in the open fields, or a dead body, or a bone of a man, or a grave, shall be unclean 7 days. See the concept here? There were 7 days of ritualistic cleansing that went on if you were unclean. And so for that time, you could not participate in temple, you could not participate in worship. And he says here, if a man dies in a tent, and you go in there and you help carry him out, you are unclean for 7 days. Everything that is uncovered in that tent is considered unclean. So if you didn't have your plasticware, with your cap, your lid down on it tight, your Tupperware, everything that wasn't in Tupperware was unclean. What do you do with the unclean stuff? Get rid of it. In fact, in another passage it says, if you have an unclean vessel in your house, you must take it outside the house and destroy it. Let me ask you a question. Suppose a man died in his tent and everybody goes in, they carry him out and they bury him and they get ready to get rid of all the unclean stuff. How do you make it clean? There's no temple. There's no altar. There's no sacrifice. There's no incense. There's no priests. And what he says here is something that was supposed to happen for 7 days is actually something that perpetually happens throughout the entire time they are in Assyrian captivity. Because it's inevitable that you're going to be unclean, and there's no way to become clean again. The things that you held in contempt are going to be the things that you miss and long for. That's what he's telling you. What they neglected is taken from them and becomes the most important thing to them. Their feast days, if you go back to Hosea chapter 9. Not only are they affected by their worship, but he says, what will you do in the solemn day, in the day of the feast of the Lord? We went back to chapter 2, verse 11. He talks about this very thing when he was warning them. And here we are 7 chapters later, and they have not done anything. They're not going to be permitted to worship this way in Assyria. They're not going to have anything to celebrate in Assyria. And there's actually not going to be anything to celebrate with in Assyria because they don't have the temple and the priests and the things. So he says, you have no chance to celebrate or worship. But he's not done yet. He says, nothing left but regrets and memories. They shall not offer wine offerings to the Lord. You will not celebrate your feast day in chapter 5. How can it possibly get worse? Look at verse 6. For lo, they are gone because of destruction. Strong word. We're talking about shattered lives and shattered dreams. Baby's born, and you hold that newborn in your hands, and you look at him and you wonder, what's God going to accomplish with him or her? What are they going to be 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years from now? I wonder, are they going to have their own business? Are they going to have their own? Listen, what if you woke up one morning and you were holding your little baby in your arms and you realized that 25 years from now they're still going to be a slave in Assyria? Doesn't it change everything? Oh, they're not going to be playing a sport somewhere and hoping that they make it to the NFL or the NHL or MLB or whatever. You don't have those opportunities when you are a slave in Assyria. Everything about life changes. And now you look back and you say, it's not only me that suffers the consequences, but it's everyone that I love suffering the consequences of my wicked choices. And then you look at it and you say, man, my whole life was about physical prosperity. And I should have been mourning for my sin. I should have been taking God seriously. He goes on. Egypt shall gather them up. Picture of captivity and slavery. Boy, how happy were they when they left Egypt. You remember every time they started whining and complaining and getting mad at God how they wanted to go back to Egypt. Oh, the leeks and the melons. We would die out here in the wilderness. We were so much better off when we were just, slaves throwing our kids in the river for the crocodiles. And God says, I told you if you would be my people and I would be your God, how wonderful things would be. But you have no right to expect that if you are going to forsake me, that I am going to stay loyal to you despite everything. Listen, you can learn a great deal about God in this book because he has been patient. The term loving kindness comes to mind. Memphis is going to bury them. Memphis was an idolatrous capital in city of southern Egypt. In other words, what he's saying is you are going to be buried by foreigners in a foreign place. When we bury someone, there are things that we want to do for them. But when you're a slave, you don't always get to do what you want to do for them, right? You're going to say goodbye to a loved one,
And it's supposed to be a precious and dear time, and your heart is breaking, and you're going to be in captivity. Instead of burying them in the promised land, you're going to bury them in Assyria. And do you think the Assyrians are going to care? He goes on. You're so worried about your physical prosperity. Look at the end of verse 6. The pleasant places for their silver nettles shall possess them. Can you imagine what the nation of Israel looked like after Assyria got done rolling through town? Buildings destroyed everywhere, stuff burnt, tables overturned, what riches weren't taken are laying scattered with who's picking them up? Would have been a metal detector's paradise. Nettles infesting the pleasant places where they used to eat their little grape dainties while they worshiped their false gods. While they ran around and involved in prostitution, where they built their beautiful groves so that they could be under their shade trees while they worshiped the creation more than the Creator. And God says that creation is going to overtake everything. Your society will be destroyed. Your valuables will be scattered or taken. And thorns shall be in your tabernacles. Where's Baal going to be when your Baal temple in Bethel is overgrown with thorns and weeds? When the groves are no longer attractive looking because of all the thorns that have grown in them. You know what happens when a place is left abandoned. God says, why are you celebrating? Turn with me real quickly as we close Isaiah chapter 34. Verse 13. And then we're going to jump back to Hosea chapter 10. Isaiah 34, verse 13. And thorns shall come up in her palaces, nettles and brambles in the fortresses thereof. And it shall be a habitation of dragons and a court for owls. You ever seen a building that the birds and the pigeons and the owls infest? It's covered with what? Exactly. You're so proud of your courtrooms, and you're so proud of your temples, and you're so proud of your groves, and you're so proud of this physical prosperity, and God says, you know what? It's going to be infested with animals, bird poop, and weeds. That's it. Because that's what happens in physical prosperity. I'll go back to Hosea chapter 10. We'll get there before too long. Hosea 10, verse 8, the high places also of Edom, the sin of Israel, shall be destroyed. The thorns and the thistle shall come up on their altars, and they shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. Listen, sometimes God brings tough times into our life, not because He's not trying to be unfair, not because He doesn't like us, but because, like a parent, He knows that sometimes you have to correct a child if you want them to avoid much, much more difficult things in the future. And God has over and over and over again been dealing with the nation of Israel. He's given them an object lesson in Hosea and his wife and the naming of the 3 kids. He's taking them to court, and he showed them from the law where they failed. He has warned and warned and warned, object lesson after object lesson after object lesson. I skipped one verse earlier for sake of time. But it's interesting, I believe it's Ezekiel. It says, in the 9th year of Hosea, the Assyrian army came. What do you learn? For 9 more years, Hosea is preaching and warning and trying. And we're going to see in a little bit the response of the people to him. In the next couple of verses, they think he's a crackpot. Oh, let's just celebrate the feast. I mean, how bad can it really get? And if that's the way you choose to live your life, when God's patience runs out, when His long-suffering is gone, when you have exhausted His mercy, and now it's time for judgment, don't you dare stand there and shake your fist in the face of an almighty God and say, how dare you? Verses 7 through 10, he is going to unfold the proof of why this is going to happen from how they are living right now. Again, to celebrate New Year's, do you have anything to celebrate? Do you have a future here? Is your provision gone? Is your protection gone? Are you going to be worshiping Him? Is there going to be anything left of your life but regrets and memories? Because the physical prosperity is in the way of spiritual prosperity. Don't celebrate like other people are, even though it seems like a good time to celebrate. Maybe a little introspect is a good thing. Let's bow for a word. Father, there are some passages that are pretty scary in your word. In Judges, we read about every man doing that which is right in his own eyes. In the end times, we read that things are going to continue as they were in Noah's day, with giving of marriage and eating and drinking and being merry. And it's so easy to get caught up in life and just to go along with the ebb and flow that we forget about you. We're so distracted by the things that our eyes see and the things that our flesh wants that we don't have time for a right relationship with you. We expect the blessings. We expect to prosper. And even sometimes when we do in our arrogance, we look at ourselves as a self-made man or as somebody who has been blessed by something else. And so often we worship the creation more than the Creator. Touch our hearts. Draw us close. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the one I love. But like a good shepherd, you're constantly bringing us back, even when we buck against it, even when we rebel, even when we don't understand.